Hey everyone, and welcome and all you UPSC aspirants out there. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into a topic that's definitely making waves in international affairs, and
Yeah.
it's something that could very well appear in your mains and prelim exams. We're talking about Sweden, their decision to join NATO last year, and now their deployment of Gripen fighter jets to Poland.
Yeah, and you know what's really fascinating about this, particularly for our UPSC audience, is the fact that Sweden has been a neutral country for a very, very long time. For over 200 years, they've had this very strict neutrality policy. So joining NATO in 2024 was a huge shift. And now they're sending their fighter jets, their most advanced jets, to support a NATO ally. I mean, it's a really big development.
So it sounds like this is a lot more than just Sweden kind of flexing its military muscle. Like there's got to be a deeper strategic play here, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. So there are two key missions that Sweden is undertaking in Poland. So first, they're part of NATO's Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine, or NSA-2 as it's commonly called. And basically what this involves is protecting the flow of military aid and humanitarian aid going into Ukraine. So it's incredibly important.
Okay, so they're basically acting as a shield to ensure that aid reaches Ukraine safely. Got it.
Right.
So what's the second mission?
The second mission is even more significant in a way. Sweden is participating in NATO's Enhanced Air Policing, or EAP, over Poland, and this mission focuses on safeguarding NATO airspace from any potential threats. And here's the really interesting part. This is the first time ever that Swedish combat aircraft are going to be operating from another NATO country's territory. So it's a historic moment.
Wow, that's a pretty big deal. It sounds like it's more than just the Gripen jets that are involved in this deployment.
You're absolutely right. Sweden's bringing in a lot more than just the Gripens. They have this 340 ASC 890 Erie, which is a really sophisticated early warning and control aircraft. And they're also deploying the S-102B Korpen, a signals intelligence aircraft, and even the C-130H Hercules for transport. It really shows their commitment to this and to, contributing to NATO's collective defense.
It definitely seems like this deployment is a big signal of Sweden's commitment to NATO, especially when you consider the statement from their defense minister, Paul Johnson, who said that, quote, NATO makes us stronger and safer.
Yeah, that statement from Johnson, I think, is really crucial for understanding Sweden's new strategic thinking. They've really made a complete 180-degree turn, from that purely neutral stance to actively participating in collective defense. It's quite a departure from their policy of 1812, wouldn't you say? And of course, all of this is happening while tensions are high because of Russia's actions in Ukraine, making Sweden's commitment even more critical.
It's interesting to see this happening, especially since Poland itself is also stepping up their NATO game as well, right?
Exactly. Poland is actively contributing to NATO's Baltic air policing mission. And that mission is all about protecting the airspace of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So it really underscores the whole collaborative nature of NATO operations. Each member contributes to the security of the alliance as a whole.
Now let's get to the Gripen jets, specifically the possibility of Sweden transferring some of them to Ukraine. This has been generating a lot of buzz lately.
Yeah, it has. And Saab CEO, Michael Johansson, seems pretty optimistic about Sweden approving this transfer. He's even talked about training Ukrainian pilots in Sweden to operate the Gripen CD variant initially, and, maybe even transitioning them to the more advanced Gripen E model later on.
So this raises a big question for me. How would this actually impact Ukraine's air combat capabilities if it were to happen? I mean, they're already slated to receive F-16s and Mirage 2000s. Would adding Gripens to that mix really be a game changer?
That's the key question, isn't it? And this is where things get really interesting. So initially, NATO actually advised against providing Gripens to Ukraine. They preferred to focus on F-16 training for the pilots. But then France decided to provide Mirage 2000s, and that kind of changed things, potentially opening the door for Gripen transfers.
So there's definitely a lot of back and forth on this issue. But why all this focus on sending Gripens to Ukraine? What makes them so special?
Well, a 2022 report by the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, argued that the Gripen is actually the ideal Western fighter jet for Ukraine's specific needs.
I'm curious. What makes the Gripen so well suited for Ukraine's operational needs? I mean, compared to other Western jets.
Well, one key factor is that Gripens would significantly reduce Ukraine's vulnerability to those long-range missiles that Russia has been using so effectively in the conflict.
Right, those long-range missiles have been a major headache for Ukraine, haven't they? Really limiting their ability to use their air force effectively.
Exactly, and the Gripen is designed for these short takeoffs and landings, from dispersed locations like roads or even highways. This makes it much harder for those missiles to actually target them.
So it's all about minimizing risk and maximizing flexibility. Makes sense?
Precisely. And another advantage is that the Gripen's combat tactics actually align very well with how the Ukrainian Air Force already operates. It's a better fit than some other Western jets in terms of their existing strategies and capabilities.
That's interesting. So how many Gripens does Sweden have right now? And
Oh.
do they have any plans for the future?
Well, right now, Sweden has about 100 Gripens in operation, and they're actually planning to increase that number to 120. Now, the most advanced model, the Gripen E, is only used by Brazil at the moment. But the CD variant, which is the one Ukraine might get, is already being used by several other countries like the Czech Republic, Hungary, South Africa, and Thailand. This just goes to show that the Gripen is a proven and reliable platform with a global reach.
This is all really fascinating stuff, especially for our UPSC aspirants out there. We're seeing real geopolitics in action, evolving alliances, and the impact of military technology on the ground.
It really is. And for those of you who are preparing for those exams, it's so important to understand these events and analyze all the underlying factors and really think about the motivations of all the players involved and, of course, the potential consequences. That's what will make your exam answers stand out.
It's like a masterclass in geopolitics unfolding right before our eyes. It shows just how important it is to not only understand what's happening, like the potential transfer of these fighter jets, but also to really delve into the why behind those decisions. What are the strategic considerations at play? What are the potential geopolitical ripple effects? That's the kind of analysis that will set you apart.
Exactly. It's all about connecting the dots, understanding those motivations, and really thinking critically about all the potential consequences. Now, let's shift gears a bit and think about the broader implications of a potential Gripen transfer. How might this actually impact the overall security landscape in Europe?
That's a great question. I mean, Sweden is really stepping up its involvement in NATO. First, with that deployment to Poland, and now potentially supplying Ukraine with advanced weaponry, that's going to send a pretty clear signal to Russia, right?
Oh, it definitely does. It really reinforces the idea that NATO stands united in its support of Ukraine and is willing to take concrete steps to help bolster their defenses. And this could lead to some very interesting scenarios. For example, it might force Russia to reassess its own strategic calculations, knowing that Ukraine has access to increasingly advanced weaponry and is receiving training from NATO members.
But couldn't that also backfire? Couldn't it actually escalate tensions, making a wider conflict more likely?
That's a very valid concern, and it's certainly a risk that policymakers have to consider very carefully. It's a very delicate balancing act, isn't it? Trying to deter aggression without actually provoking escalation. But it is worth noting that Russia has already shown that it's willing to escalate, even with all the Western support that Ukraine is already receiving. So the question becomes, what's the best course of action to actually deter further aggression and protect the interests of NATO and its allies?
This brings us back to that fundamental shift in Swedish foreign policy that we talked about earlier. From a stance of strict neutrality to actively supporting a nation at war with Russia. That's a pretty big departure from how they've historically approached things.
It is, and it really underscores the profound impact that this conflict in Ukraine has had on European security thinking. We're really witnessing a realignment of alliances and a redefinition of national interests, and all in real time.
It's like the old playbook has been thrown out the window, and now everyone is scrambling to adapt to this new reality. What does this all mean for a country like Sweden, which has always prided itself on staying out of these kinds of conflicts?
That's the big question, isn't it? This shift definitely suggests that they are more comfortable with taking on a more active role in collective defense. They're not shying away from taking a stance anymore. Whether this is a permanent shift in their foreign policy or just a response to the specific circumstances of this conflict, though, is something that remains to be seen.
It makes you wonder if they'll become even more involved in future NATO operations and what that will mean for the balance of power in the Baltic region, especially with Russia's increasingly assertive behavior in recent years.
Those are really excellent questions, and honestly, the answers are still unfolding as we speak. But I think we can say that even this symbolic deployment to Poland, it could be seen as drawing a line in the sand. It signals that NATO is prepared to defend its interests in the region.
All of this really highlights just how important it is to stay informed about all these developments, especially for those of you aspiring to join the Indian Foreign Service. Understanding all the nuances of international relations, the shifting dynamics within alliances, the implications of military deployments, it's all essential for anyone who's thinking about a career in diplomacy and foreign policy.
It really is. And these events provide a fantastic real-world lens for you to actually analyze and apply the concepts that you're studying. This isn't just theoretical anymore. This is happening right now.
So pay attention, do your research, connect the dots. What's happening in Europe has implications far beyond just that immediate region.
And remember, even seemingly small decisions can have far-reaching consequences on the global stage. Now, to really get a deeper understanding of why this Gripen is causing such a stir, let's shift our focus to the jet itself and explore what actually makes it so unique.
Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about the possibility of sending Gripen jets to Ukraine and how NATO initially kind of preferred Ukraine to focus just on F-16 training. But now France is in the picture offering those Mirage 2000s. It seems like things are changing. What was behind that initial hesitation to diversify the types of jets Ukraine was getting?
It really comes down to logistics and efficiency,
Yeah.
Training pilots on multiple sophisticated aircraft types at the same time, that's a massive undertaking. It requires a huge investment of time and resources. Plus, you need specialized expertise. It's very likely that NATO just wanted to streamline the process, maximize the impact, but minimize the complexity by sticking to a single platform like the F-16. The F-16 enjoys very broad support within the alliance.
So it was a calculated decision based on resource management and making the most of what was available. But wouldn't providing a variety of aircraft, even if it's harder logistically, send a stronger message of deterrence to Russia? I mean, it shows a united front and a willingness to equip Ukraine with a range of capabilities.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's a dilemma that NATO faces all the time. Balancing Ukraine's immediate needs with the potential risks of escalation is a very tricky calculation. But France's decision to send those Mirage 2000s has definitely added another layer of complexity to the whole thing. Now that multiple aircraft types are on the table, the benefits of also adding Gripens might actually outweigh the initial concerns about those logistical challenges.
Especially since those RUSI analysts were advocating for the Gripen as the ideal choice for Ukraine. And we can't forget about Sweden's growing influence in NATO, right? They're becoming a key player, especially on that northern flank. Their expertise with the Gripen, coupled with their proximity to the conflict, could make them the perfect partner for training and supporting Ukrainian pilots on this new platform.
Absolutely. And for all of you UPSC aspirants out there, this situation really is a perfect example of international relations and strategic decision-making happening right in front of us. You can see how different factors like military aid, alliance dynamics, the changing nature of warfare, it all comes together to shape the outcome of this conflict.
It really is like a masterclass in geopolitics, isn't it? Unfolding right before our eyes. It underscores how important it is to understand not just the what of events, like the transfer of fighter jets, but the why behind those decisions.
Yeah.
What are the strategic considerations? What are the potential geopolitical ripple effects? That's the kind of analysis that will really make your exam answers stand out.
Exactly. It's about connecting those dots, understanding the motivations, and thinking critically about the consequences. Now, let's think about the bigger picture for a minute. How might a potential Gripen transfer impact the overall security landscape in Europe?
That's a great question. Sweden is really stepping up their game within NATO. First, the deployment to Poland, and now potentially supplying Ukraine with advanced weapons. That sends a clear message to Russia, don't you think?
It definitely does. It reinforces that message that NATO is united in its support for Ukraine, and they're willing to take concrete steps to bolster their defenses. This could lead to some interesting outcomes. It might even force Russia to rethink their strategy, knowing that Ukraine has access to more advanced weaponry and is getting training from NATO members.
But could it also backfire? I mean, could it escalate tensions and make a wider conflict more likely?
That's always a concern, and it's a risk policymakers always have to weigh very carefully. It's about deterring aggression without provoking escalation. It's a fine line. But it's important to remember that Russia has shown a willingness to escalate, even with all the support that Ukraine is already getting. So the real question is, what's the best way to deter further aggression and protect the interests of NATO and its allies?
This takes us back to that fundamental shift in Swedish foreign policy we talked about earlier, going from strict neutrality to actively supporting a country at war with Russia. It's a huge change from their traditional approach.
It really is. And it just shows the impact that the conflict in Ukraine has had on how Europe thinks about security. We're literally watching alliances realign and national interests be redefined in real time.
It's like everyone threw out the old playbook and is trying to figure out this new reality. What does that even mean for a country like Sweden? They've always been so proud of staying out of these types of conflicts.
That is the million-dollar question. This shift suggests that Sweden is getting more and more comfortable with playing a more active role in collective defense. They're not afraid to take a stance. But whether it's a permanent shift in their foreign policy or just a reaction to this conflict, well, only time will tell.
I wonder if they'll get even more involved in future NATO operations and what that would mean for the balance of power in the Baltic region, especially with Russia getting more assertive in recent years.
Yeah.
Those are great questions, and honestly, we're still waiting to see how it all plays out. But even just sending troops to Poland, that's a symbolic gesture that could be seen as drawing a line. It shows that NATO is ready to defend its interests in the region.
This all highlights how important it is to stay informed about these events, especially for those of you hoping to join the Indian Foreign Service. You need to understand the ins and outs of international relations, the shifting dynamics of alliances, and what these military deployments really mean. It's crucial for anyone who wants to work in diplomacy and foreign policy.
Absolutely. These real-world events give you a chance to use what you're learning and see how it plays out in the real world. It's not just theory anymore. This is happening right now.
So pay attention. Do your research. Connect the dots. What's happening in Europe affects us all.
Remember, even small decisions can have big consequences on the world stage. Now, to really understand why everyone is talking about the Gripen, let's take a closer look at the jet itself and see what makes it so special.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So we've talked about a lot of stuff today, Sweden's big change in foreign policy, their growing role in NATO, and that whole debate about sending Gripen jets to Ukraine. But let's talk about the Gripen itself. What is it about this jet that has military experts saying it's the perfect choice for Ukraine?
Well, the Gripen is a multi-role fighter jet. It was developed by Saab, which is a Swedish company. It's known for being versatile and agile, and it has advanced technology. It's designed to work well in tough environments. But what really makes it stand out, especially for what's happening in Ukraine, is its operational philosophy, how it was meant to be used.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly, operational philosophy? Is it about more than just having fancy tech?
It is. The Gripen was designed to be flexible and adaptable. It can operate from all sorts of locations with minimal support. And that fits in perfectly with how the Ukrainian Air Force has been fighting. They're using decentralized bases and relying on quick strikes to counter Russia's forces, which are bigger and slower.
You know, that reminds me of something I read in that RUSI report. They talked about how the Gripen can take off and land from really short runways, almost anywhere. That's got to be a huge advantage in a war where airfields are constantly being targeted.
Absolutely. Being able to operate from those kinds of dispersed locations, like roads or highways, makes the Gripen much harder to hit with those long-range missiles that Russia has. It's all about minimizing risk and keeping Ukraine's air power strong. Flexibility and minimizing vulnerability, that's the key.
So even though people are saying the Gripen would be perfect for Ukraine, it's not like it's some brand new, untested plane, is it?
Nope, not at all. The CD variant, which is the one Ukraine would probably get first, is already being used by countries all over the world. The Czech Republic, Hungary, South Africa, Thailand, just to name a few. It's a reliable plane with a global support system.
So it's not just about the jet itself. It's about having all that support already in place. The maintenance, the training, that's a big plus for Ukraine, especially right now.
You got it. Having that network up and running means that it'll be much easier to get the Gripens working in Ukraine and to make sure they can stay flying for a long time. Sustainment is a big part of any military operation, especially one like this.
Okay, so for all our UPSC folks out there, let's sum things up. We've got Sweden, a country that was always neutral, really stepping up within NATO, sending Gripens to Poland, maybe even to Ukraine. It's a new era for them in European security.
And it's all happening because of the war in Ukraine. That conflict has changed how Europe thinks about security, and it's forced countries like Sweden to rethink what they need to do.
It just shows how quickly things can change in the world.
Yeah.
Alliances change, priorities change. Even a smaller country like Sweden can play a big role in shaping the future.
That's right. International relations are always changing, and what we're seeing right now really highlights how important it is to stay informed. You got to look beyond just the headlines and really understand what's driving these events.
And that is what the deep dive is all about. We hope this deep dive gave you better understanding of what's going on and maybe gave you some good insights to think about for those UPSC exams. Remember, knowledge is power. And to really get it, you have to understand why things are happening, not just what's happening. That's how you write great answers.
And if you like this episode, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share it with your fellow UPSC friends, and don't forget to leave a comment below if you have any thoughts or questions.
We'd love to hear what you think. And a huge thank you to the Asian Times for their reporting on this. They've done a fantastic job covering this complex issue.
That's right. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking those tough questions.
Goodbye, everyone.